This is Suzanne Wagner of the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles. In the next hour, you will view a conversation I held with Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz in 1979 at her retreat in Bollingen, Switzerland. Dr. von Franz is a world-renowned Jungian analyst. She was born in 1915 to Austrian parents who moved the family to Switzerland when she was 3 years old. She grew up in Switzerland and it has become her home country. She earned a PhD in classical languages from the University of Zurich. In 1933, as a young student of 18, she first met Jung. This was a fateful meeting. Within a year, she began analysis with Jung and became his major research assistant in his extensive studies of alchemical texts. She contributed a great deal to two of Jung's major works, Ion and Mysterium Conjunctionis. Her own first book, Aurora Consurgens, was published in the Bollingen series and is a companion volume to Mysterium Conjunctionis. Through the years since Jung's death in 1961, von Franz has published a large body of work and has lectured widely all over the world. Her biography of Jung, C.G. Jung, His Myth in Our Time, is a profound and brilliant illumination of the way his work emerged from his own individuation. During our visits with von Franz, she told me that Jung had encouraged her, even insisted that she build this retreat for herself away from her busy life in Zurich. To design the tower, she enlisted the services of Jung's son, Franz Jung, who is an architect. For many years, she shared this retreat with her close friend and colleague, Barbara Hanna. This conversation took place in the garden outside the tower in September of 1979. Since that time, Dr. von Franz has retired from lecturing and analytic practice. Dr. von Franz, I'd like to ask you some questions about your experiences with Jung over the many years that you worked with him. In terms of his own typology, he was, didn't he feel that he himself was a thinking intuitive?
Yes, he felt he was a thinking intuitive type.
So it would have been, the inferior function would have been somewhere in the feeling sensation realm.
Yes.
And that would have been where all the imps and the devils played, I suppose.
Well, you
out
see,
of the unconscious.
for me that would be difficult to judge because I'm a thinking intuitive too.
Yourself.
So I have also inferior feeling. So if there was a clash, you never knew quite whose inferior feeling. But I would say in 85% of the cases I had to see that it was mine.
I see. So between the two of you, that would be a kind of dark area.
In that type, it's difficult because in one way you get marvelously on as long as you keep to thinking and intuition. You get on completely. And then on the feeling area, you have trouble.
Well, I wondered if you have any anecdotes or stories about how you bumped into his shadow side, or how it ever upset you, or you felt disappointed, or...
I only once really bumped into his anima, and I came into the hour, and admittedly was a bit in the animus, but not much. And he just started at once, you are in the animus and one cannot talk to you today, wow, and really shouted at me, and I started to cry, which he hated, and then I got angry and shouted back, and so we shouted at each other for quite a while, and then I went home and cried and was absolutely desperate. And the next morning the secretary rang up and said, Professor Jung wants to ask you if you had a minute time to come over at 11 o'clock, and I said naturally, and I came, and when I entered the house he was then about 68 or 70, and you know, a big man. He stood up heavily and bowed very politely and said, I'm sorry to ask you to come out, but I wanted to apologize. I was yesterday in the anima. I can't tell you, but something very disagreeable happened to me just before the hour, and I hadn't time to catch myself up, and so I can't tell you, unfortunately, what it is because it's private, but I want to apologize. So then I felt very humble and said, it's me who has to apologize too. Mm-hmm. And I must say, when I went home, I thought, now I have much more confidence in that man than before. Mm-hmm. Because I knew if there is a misunderstanding, and in a long relationship there is always once a misunderstanding or, a clash of the negative side, he would always come round, see it at once and come round. Mm-hmm. So it really helped the relationship in the end. I was glad it happened. Mm-hmm. Because then later when there was trouble, I always thought, either it's his fault and then he'll come round, or it's my fault and then I'll have to come round, and that's all there is to it.
So it gave you a sense of freedom and
trust. It gave me a sense of confidence.
Mm-hmm. I wondered how your impressions of him changed over the years. It must have been a gradual process of realizing how great he was, for one thing. Or did you know immediately?
I knew immediately that he was the greatest man I'd ever met and would probably ever meet. Uh-huh. And the process was rather the reverse. I was so awed by him when, being 18 and he 58 and a great man and so on, that for a long time I had difficulty to relate to him because I was too overawed. Mm-hmm. He made me speechless. I couldn't, in a way, relate to him. I felt like a frog looking up to an elephant. And didn't dare to talk even. I mean, I had great trouble to talk openly to him. Mm-hmm. He intimidated me terribly. And so I generally wrote him letters about what I thought. And when I saw him, I was just speechless. Mm-hmm. I just told him my dreams and walked off again shyly. Mm-hmm. And the development was that I slowly, through such incidents as I told you before, mm-hmm. It became more a human relationship, and a more equal relationship, and a possibility to talk openly or not to talk, or mm-hmm. not to be so overawed mm-hmm. as I was first.
Did you know Emma Jung very well? Did you have much contact with her?
No, I didn't know her very well. She was a great friend of Miss Hannah, and they got on very well together. Mm-hmm. We never had any difficulties, but I never came close to her, except in the last summer when she was ill and she knew she was going to die. She apparently talked to her husband, and they decided that I should finish her book. And one day when I went to the tower, he said to me, "Go over to speak to my wife." And I looked at him amazed, and he said, "Her attitude to you has changed." Mm. And then I had a very good talk with her. He had the wish that I should do it. And so that then suddenly, in this last moment before her death, made a very positive bridge. Mm-hmm. And I had an interesting dream. I was very uncertain. I naturally agreed to do it. I mean, who wouldn't in such a situation? But subjectively, I felt I can't do ordered creative work, it's not my work. How can I carry out a child which somebody else has conceived?
Yes.
That's a transplantation. How can I do it? Mm-hmm. And I was very doubtful about it. And then I dreamt in the night. Yes, I must first tell in reality, my dog, after she had been in heat, sometimes had imagined she was going to have puppies. And then she made holes in the ground and lay in them happily, with his mother feelings, hoping for puppies. And she did that once in Jung's tower under a bench and had made a hole there, and we laughed about it. And in the dream, Mrs. Jung had a big bowl of soup, and she said, "I'm going to put that into that," and she put it in that hole which my dog made. Ah. Now, you see, the soup bowl is one of the symbols of the Grail. That was the Grail. He is in one version, the Grail is a soup bowl. And so it means I hand now this soup bowl, my child, to your mother instinct. As an adopted child, to your dog, which is your mother instinct.
That's beautiful.
So that is an act of adoption on the feminine side. You see, I've adopted her child, so to speak, or she has entrusted me with her child. And when I woke up after the dream, I thought, now, I'll probably be able to do it.
Yes.
My unconscious has accepted the task.
How did you feel about Jung's relationship with Tony Wolff? How did you know of it? First of all, it was just there, I guess.
I knew it by gossip, I don't know. I mean, he made no secret of it, so everybody knew it, and very soon, I couldn't remember the exact date, but very soon I got into the Jungian pupil patient circle, I heard about it. And I actually guessed it the first time I met him, because he was with Tony Wolff in the tower. And I thought, oh, that's his woman friend.
How do you understand that, his need for that kind of relationship with her? Did it have to do with the development of his work, do you think? Or his own relationship to the deeper unconscious?
You see, a man of his stature, one woman couldn't fill out all his needs for relationship. And Mrs. Jung was, he loved her very, very much, but in certain areas of his work she didn't follow him. She didn't come along. And so when he met Tony, he was in the midst of this big crisis where he went down in the unconscious, which he tells about in his memories. And she went along there in that experiment with him. And he always said, I'll always be grateful to her that she has come along with me there. That was the real reason. And the other reason is that if a man's anima needs are not fulfilled by one woman, then if he doesn't live it, his unlived eros goes on to the daughters, and they develop a father complex. I've just seen that the other day with a case where a man the daughter dreamt every night that he was breaking into her bedroom and raping her, which he didn't in reality, but you see, there was a kind of unfulfilled life in him which was subterraneously, and he had experiences where he realized that. He suddenly saw that his daughters began to flirt with him, and that terrified him. And so he said he had only the choice of being either the perfect gentleman according to bourgeois standards and have neurotic children, and everybody would just be sorry for him that he has neurotic children, or to be the man at whom everybody can throw stones, but help his children not to become sick.
Not to be burdened with his own.
Not with burdens with his life. And so he decided to choose the latter. And he had many more dreams, which I don't want to tell, but dreams which very clearly told him that that was fate and he had to accept it. Even, you see, at the time he lived, that was still, nowadays it's practically fashion. But in these days it was a terrible thing, and there were a lot of people who wouldn't talk to him after that anymore. They were very shocked.
Well, in some parts of Europe, there is more of a tradition for a kind of an inspirational relationship with another woman. I think in France it's more accepted.
In France it's
always
more,
has been.
Altogether more sexual views in France are much more liberal. Or in China it was in the old China, quite officially accepted situation. But in our culture it was a scandal.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to be, at least in my own experience, so common for women. I mean, it seems that women
men are more polygamous and women are in general more monogamous. That doesn't mean I have seen in my practice many women who got in that conflict too.
Yes.
But it's not so frequent.
Do you have any thoughts about why there is that tendency in women for more monogamous? Is it?
I think that's nature. On the chimpanzee gorilla level, on which we have lived ones too. There's always the big, strong male with a lot of females. It's a biological. On that level, it's a biological law.
In all the years of Jung's work as it was developing, he did have a circle of people around him who were quite closely related.
Yes.
And did he appreciate that? That he had loyal friends, and did he find that a comfort? Because so much of what he did was groundbreaking.
Oh yes, he even writes in one of his letters, I have found among my patients pupils, and with some a friendship for life has developed. And they carry on my work. I mean, he was very appreciative, was very glad not to be quite alone, you know. Such a pioneering work, one is very isolated. So if somebody was able to follow him, to come along, he was always very happy.
He seems to have found not as many men who could join him, or is that your impression? I don't know.
Oh, there were some men who followed, with whom he had very good contact, but naturally there was also a lot of trouble, because you see men, especially men he got better on with men in another field, poets, writers, artists, and so on, because they don't compare themselves with him. They had the feeling, I am a good painter, or I am a good writer, and this is a good psychologist. But if you are in the same field, there was always jealousy. They compared themselves with him, and then they felt crushed and inferior, and then they became nasty. That was a very regular pattern you saw with many who were working in the field of psychology and psychiatry. It needs a certain generosity to appreciate a great person of your same sex. And the devil always whispers to you, he's better, I'm better, he's only that, I'm better, and the whole jealousy, and then that creates trouble. He took great trouble to avoid that, but in a way, he was a crushing personality for a man. You know, he did everything better. He was better in psychology, but then he painted beautifully. He could cut in stone. So whenever you compared yourself with him, you felt like a louse, and that naturally created a lot of secret poison.
Yeah. Do you think there's something of that in these continued accusations of anti-Semitism that keep surfacing even now? I mean, in the history books and in the...
No, I think that is mainly kept up by the Freudians as a policy. You see, the developments of time have made that Freudianism has so much won out in the world, and is taught at every university, in every school, and you have Freudians in every clinic nowadays, and so on, that you can say people are beginning to be a bit sick of it. I mean, it's become self-evident. I mean, there is a certain truth in what Freud has found, and that is now self-evident. Everybody knows that one can have repressed sex and the Oedipus complex. That's now become common knowledge. So now the development goes to discover Jung, because he's still new to the masses, to the majority of intellectuals and so on. And the Freudians feel the losers. They feel they are begin to bore people, to not being anymore on top. And so they keep up that libel quite artificially, for professional reasons, you could even say. And then there is another aspect, namely fear. You see, there are many people who are terrified of the unconscious. And as Jung is a kind of advertiser of relating to the unconscious, you have to find something to shout him down.
It's a defense against the
defense. So it's not so much a defense against Jung, but really, if you analyze, if you look at those people who have those terrible resistances and always keep up that label, even if you prove to them, you show them all the facts, and then emotionally they just go on. Yes, but he was an anti-Semite somehow, anyhow. Then it's generally that they are afraid of their own unconscious. And they can't find many things. Jung has lived such a hidden life, you know. I mean, he has never gone into the world much or taken any attitude that they always dig up that old story that he was the president of the German society and that proves that he's anti-Semitic.
So there isn't much in his life to go on. They have to search for something. And
they have to search for something.
I see. Can you say anything about how the problem of evil might have constellated itself? I guess we're circling around that a little bit. In personal experience in the Jungian community as the years went on, I mean, doesn't it constellate itself right in your own backyard?
Yeah, naturally, obviously. But Jung's awareness of the problem of evil did not spring from there. He took very much part in what was happening in the world, and he was very, very worried over the First World War, as you can take out his memories, and the second, and he was very terrified of a third one, or a Holocaust of our whole culture. He seriously reckoned with that. And via that, the problem of evil has come into being a major preoccupation. While the constant mischief and jealousies and anima nonsense, that he took more on his stride, you know. He didn't take that very tragically. He just said, are you so infantile, and all those pupils I've trained now so long and they're still just kindergarten. He just cursed it, but it didn't upset him. What you would call the personal shadow of people didn't upset him. He just grumbled and cursed a bit, but that's not the problem of evil. It's that major evil of complete destruction which worried him.
And his real approach to that was the inner work that he did.
The only thing you can do.
Only thing you can do.
To confront yourself with it where you are. All the rest, all the benevolent, if benevolent preaching would help, then we would be out of the trouble long ago, because we get a lot of benevolent and reasonable preaching, but it doesn't help. So the only place where you can really put the hand on it and deal with it body to body, the problem of evil, is in yourself. And there you have the hope to change something, but the hope to change the world is a childish illusion. Go and tell Khomeini that he is possessed. He will cut your head off for it as thanks.
It seems almost impossible that enough people in our time would be wise enough or courageous enough to choose the inner way with the problem of evil. It's so tempting to try to be heroic and act outwardly.
Yes.
For example, all over the world, the nuclear weapons and the nuclear power that's developing. It makes me want to jump up and run out and spend all my time and money to try to stop that.
Well,
rather than do the inner.
You'll soon run up against some obscure lobbies where all your efforts get blocked. I think one should say it aloud. One should not be a coward. One should make demonstrations. One should go against it. But one should not waste all one's energy into it because it doesn't help. One should say one's opinion, and that's all. And for the rest, fight inwardly. Because you see, finally, it's not we who will decide that question. It is the collective unconscious which will decide, or in religious language, God. And if you work on your own problem, then you might get into analysis a politician who has influence.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have done more than if you had gone in the street with a transparent every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that you get an influential politician into your analysis or suddenly interested in Jungian psychology, you can't make.
No.
You can only work on yourself, and that is the unconscious. And therefore, I say, if God wants to save the world, He will call up certain people to know certain things.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It happens always as a miracle, unexpectedly. But you can go to meet that miracle by working on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I left it as natural as I can.
What was here when you first came?
There was only a water hole as big as that.
Mm-hmm.
About here, just that little corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had dug that out. There's a dragonfly.
Beautiful color.
Mm-hmm.
Do they eat from the pond?
Yes, they eat the little mosquitoes and things. I mean, bugs and mosquitoes and these kind of things. It's very good because otherwise you would have in the autumn a lot of mosquitoes with such a pond, but I never have any.
Don't have any.
They eat them all. So they are even useful on top of being charming.
What happens to the pond in the winter?
It freezes.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably the toad. She's always resting there. There's one. Aren't they sweet?
Oh, they're beautiful.
That's a toad.
Yeah.
It's a toad,
like
a kind of toad. It's in German it's called Unke, because it doesn't croak, it makes coo, 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 coo. Very delicate, but you hear it very far in the woods. It's a delicate but penetrating sound. But they mostly do it in the mating time in June. But you hear them sometimes also in the evening when they are very good mood. They make coo, 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 coo.
Really, they're sweet. They breathe in the air. It looks as if they put their mouth up above the water sometimes.
No, they can also breathe under.
Both, huh?
And they can stand it under the earth. When it's very dry, they go under the earth and they survive till there's water again.
Mm-hmm.
They dig into the earth and they sleep till about the warm days of April. It's always exciting in spring. You wander and you are the toads there, and then at a warm day, the first toad.
Every time I see one, I want to laugh. They look like little men.
And there's a little one. If you come over here.
Oh, yes.
See? They are little human beings because they have such hands and feet like human beings.
I know.
That's what's so nice about them. They are not so inhuman. They are really like little men.
Dr. von Franz, can you explain the concept of the personal shadow and the collective shadow?
Well, in practical life they merge, but the personal shadow is the personal shortcomings of things which every human being could be conscious of, which is not archetypal and therefore not a mystery. For instance, such things as greed for money or jealousy. Jealousy is one of the main aspects of the shadow, or laziness, sloppiness, unrelatedness, sentimentality and whatnot. Inferiorities which everybody has, but prefers not to know about. And because we generally strive through education and through environmental pressure to be a bit better than we actually are. Or we have our own ideals. I oughtn't to be jealous. I oughtn't to have a power complex. But you see, for instance, that in criminals, they sometimes live their inferiority, and then they have a personal shadow which is noble. They dream about noble people, and it's just reversed. They live, so to speak, their mean side, and then they have a positive shadow. And therefore, even in what is more the average truth, the inferior shadow is not really bad. It's just human, all too human. Mm-hmm. And something one could know about. If one is jealous, or if one is suddenly possessed by wanting money or so on, one could know about it if one is honest with oneself. But the collective shadow has to do with the dark side of the archetype of the self. That means it's the shadow of the God image. In the Christian tradition, it would be the devil. Mm-hmm. And that has always been personified and felt as something which has not to do directly with the human being. I mean, if somebody is possessed by the devil, he's much worse than just, he's not human, it's demonic. Mm-hmm. And but on the other hand, generally that merges. First you have this area of dim, dark side, and behind it lurks the other. I've, for instance, seen that when Germany went to the devil in Nazism, people fell into it through their personal shadow. For instance, they didn't want to lose their job because they were clinging to money. That was their personal shadow. But then they joined in with the Nazi movement for that reason and did much worse things than they would have done normally under normal social conditions. So you can say the personal shadow is the bridge to the collective shadow, or the open door to the collective shadow. But the collective shadow comes up in those terrible mass psychoses.
Well, now, if a person becomes more aware of the personal shadow...
Then that's why it's so tremendously important, because then you don't fall into the collective shadow.
Mm-hmm. There's not that automatic
There's
link.
Not that open. It's like if you have a room and there's one door not shut, and mm-hmm. there the devil can come in. Mm-hmm. And if you know your personal shadow, you can shut all the doors. Mm-hmm.
So, for example...
And then you don't join into massacres and holocausts and such.
You catch yourself and you can
catch
stop.
Yourself and you realize, and you can keep out of it and keep reasonable, keep your head. While the average person who doesn't know about her personal shadow, they get swept away by the collective evil.
Is it possible to speak of a shadow in terms of national identities? A shadow in Switzerland, a shadow in the United States?
Yes, naturally. Mm-hmm. The summing up of every society has its ideals and lives up to those ideals, mm-hmm. and has also a shadow. Mm-hmm. The average American has a typical shadow, and the average Swiss has a typical shadow, which mm-hmm. is slightly different. Mm-hmm. But there again, you can say the more individuals in a nation know about their shadow, the better that nation is off, or less likely to fall into a mass psychotic, destructive, sweeping away movement where people lose every measure, you know, I mean, just kill their relatives, kill thousands of people without even having a bad conscience about it. It's real, just madness. Mm-hmm.
Is the analytic process the only way of coming to terms with the shadow or becoming aware of it? Are there other ways for individual people to become aware?
I don't know if it is the only way, but it's the only way I know. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, to see one's own shadow is such a painful thing that you will never do it honestly in a group. You mm-hmm. can't admit such painful little secrets. So all the official confessions people make in groups, oh, I'm jealous or I'm childish, are just words. They cover up. When it comes to the really painful spots, even the analyst has to be very tactful and very treading on dangerous ground and looking out of the window, and, you know, because the other is wincing under his realization of his inferiority. Mm-hmm. And so he needs a human being situation to help the other to become aware of his shadow. Mm-hmm. And you can't do it in a big sweep.
It's the individual connection, though, that is so important.
It's the individual connection which is decisive. Because you can't stand your shadow when you are alone. You just collapse. You need a human being to hold your hand when you go into that dangerous area.
And if there's a group, you slide out, kind of.
You slide out or you make general... You know, like in the Oxford groups, everybody said, I'm greedy of money, I drink too much. And they didn't mean it. It's in the personal relationship that it becomes so awkward. And then you are pinpointed, and then it becomes an indelible shock to see your own shadow. And then you have it, then you really know it. You can't forget it again the next morning.
Well, doesn't that also happen in long-term friendships or marriages, that you know, you're kind of up against the wall, faced with it?
All close relationships are, in a way, analytical relationships. It is because it simply means a relationship in which both partners try to become conscious by exchanging with each other, sharing each other's fate.
There seems to be around marriage a kind of avoidance and aversion now. So divorce is so easy, and it's happening, at least in the States, that people don't stay married very long. So they in a way, are they running from the shadow, do you think?
They are running either from the shadow or very often from animus and anima. That's the big complication between the sexes. If you live with somebody of the same sex, it's the shadow gets constellated. If you live with somebody of the other sex, then the bigger task comes. That's why it's the more valuable relationship, because it's also the bigger task. Because that constellates anima and animus. And as the average American nowadays doesn't know yet what that is. Whenever animus and anima clash, they run apart. It's finished. They throw it over. If they stuck it out, they would learn a lot about themselves. That doesn't mean that we are not sometimes for divorce. There are situations you better think of a divorce. There are relationships where both partners become destructive to each other, plainly destructive. And then it is better to make a final decision. But there are others where it's just a clash of animus and anima, and if they could become conscious, they could get on again.
It seems that every place but Switzerland, the money is going up and down, up and down. It's in high inflation in the United States. Does this, and even the terms are psychological, inflation, deflation,
depression, we are going to a recession, to a depression, through a boom, through an inflation. It's all psychological. Well, take it as at the first sight, that's what it is.
So, but what is it that is inflating
money
us?
Is a symbol for the circulation, the extrovert circulation of energy. And when you have a boom, then there's too much extroversion, too much consuming, too much activity going on. And then you get forced into a depression and a recession, which forces you into poverty, which means more introversion, more sacrifice, more turning to inner values. You can't afford a television, you have to amuse yourself with your own thoughts, and so on. So you can just read those papers with a psychological eye and you see what's happening.
What is it about Switzerland that makes it so solid here in terms of the money?
I think that's because we escaped 2 wars, and therefore we have more traditional continuity. You see, wars mix a population up completely, uproot them. A whole generation of men disappears. The next generation of men is brought up by widowed mothers. And then there are enormous transplantations of, for instance, in Germany, all the Germans who were east of the Iron Curtains flooded into Western Germany, married Western Germans, and so on. They have no roots, they have no love to the village. They settled in a village because they got a job there, but they don't love the village, and so on. So that makes for a rootless population, and a rootless population looks for only what they have before their nose. A good job, money, a flat, schools for the children to bring them up. That's ABC. Naturally, I would do the same thing. I mean, if you are thrown out of your country, that's what you look for in the other country. And that destroys all human relationships, be the grandmother, the grandfather, the aunts being together, knowing the village. Everybody knew you when you were a little child. You are contained in a family. If you lose your father or mother, the whole neighbors come together and help you, and they knew your father and mother and so on. All these ties are broken. Mm-hmm. And we need continuity, historical continuity, and the more a population can have a time of long historical continuity, the more they get balanced. Because you see, I see it up here, how things regulate themselves. When I came up here, my neighbor, who's died now, who sold me the land, said, look here, up here in Moos we are a little family. We quarrel all, we hate each other. He didn't talk to his own neighbor, never, they didn't greet each other. But we never go too far, because if we are stuck in the snow with the car, we have to help each other out. You wouldn't help me out, wouldn't you? I said, yes, I would. So he said, you see, for instance, one peasant cuts a tree across the border of the other peasant. He doesn't make a lawsuit. He smiles, and he cuts also a tree on the other side of the border. And then they meet again in the inn, and they have a little grin at each other, and that's all there is. And so the shadow is balanced out. Mm-hmm. And you don't call the state in and the whole injustice of so-called justice. Mm-hmm. It's all settled on human level. And everybody knows everybody's shadow and says, don't tell that lady that and that, you know she's and so and so. Gossip is a form of low kind of psychological analysis of each other, you see. Uh-huh. And so everybody's contained. And now I feel, first I was the foreign queer lady here with a funny house, but now that I'm here for a long time, the peasants come to me and talk we the Bollingen people don't want Jona to do that and that. I belong. Uh-huh. That makes me very happy. Uh-huh.
And Switzerland has had a long history.
Has not much yet. It has also big towns, and there we have all the troubles we have in the world. Mm-hmm. But we have still big areas of little towns and villages where the great-great-grandfather is buried in the churchyard, mm-hmm. and where people just follow on the rhythm of the past and are contained in a natural community.
There must be something, though, in the psychology of the Swiss, not just the geography, that has allowed this introversion of war, as Miss Hannah once put
yes.
it, so that war isn't acted out.
Well, I don't think we are better. It is just, we are so small mm-hmm. that we can't act out war. Mm. I mean, we can't attack Germany or France or Italy. We are the smallest. And therefore, we have to defend. We are like a hedgehog. The Nazis called us the hedgehog they were going to pick up at the end, as they sang. We just try to defend our little country, and we can't afford exploding with our shadow against the others. We would nicely get it if we did. Mm-hmm. So we have a shadow, we can't explode outside, so that has finally made us reasonable to look at our own shadow. It's the same as a neurotic patient. Generally, he only comes in analysis to look at his shadow when he has quarreled with his whole surrounding so badly that he has to. Then he says, my God, perhaps it's me, let's look at it. And that's how it's gone with us. And then slowly the Swiss got reasonable and realized the advantage of it and made it an institution. Our democracy is an institution of quarreling with each other on the basis of certain legal limitations. Mm-hmm. We have a constant hot, not cold, but hot war among each other. Mm-hmm. But we are respecting certain fair play rules where it could get too bad.
Well, do you think that the big powers in the world, like the United States and Russia, are learning their limitations now at all?
I think that is my hope. that they get into the same situation that they can't afford a war anymore, and therefore get confined to their own
Borders.
And if they are confined to their own borders, then they will have to confront themselves with their inner difficulties, and what's wrong in their own country.
So
the Russians will have to look at their dissidents and take them a bit more seriously, and America will have to look at their commercial dealings, which are a bit too rough, and look at the shadow there.
In that case, a depression might be the beginning of a healing process.
Yes, certainly. It's a great advantage. A depression is a blessing of God. I mean, in the individual, it's the greatest blessing somebody can have.
Not used to looking at it that way.
Jung always talked about the blessing of a neurosis, because it's the only way you are tempted to look within. As long as things go out well, you run away from yourself. Or most people do.
Do you think his work can have its effect without the analytic process? There is the idea floating around that analysis is a form that might end. It's something that grew up in the 19th, 20th century, and it might not go on as a way of doing things. The analytic process itself. I don't believe that.
I think if one takes the analytic process as certain young pupils take it, as a whole technique and an encounter with certain payment regulations and all these technicalities, transference, counter-transference, that's all nonsense, but that was never what Jung meant. For Jung, analysis was a spontaneous encounter of two human beings, and I think that will always happen. Because you look in the Far East, the real wisdom has always been transmitted from master to pupil. That means always from human being to single human being. It's the only way to really transmit something.
But there's usually a container of some kind, a form that holds you together.
I think that will just vary.
Uh-huh.
It will just be different.
Yeah.
I don't know what form it might take or not take, I mean. And then certainly many of the ideas Jung expressed are what one would call in the air, and people find them independently of, without knowing Jung or reading Jung. They, by looking into themselves, come to the same conclusions. So to my idea, there are thousands of Jungians in the whole world who have never heard the word Jung, but to me they are Jungians, because they are based on the same experience and the same inner truth. They give it different names, and that doesn't matter.
You can't really say that Jung's work represents just science, or science in the old sense, or that it's not a religion, and yet what is it itself, the work that he did? Doesn't it somewhere live on the border between those two?
It's certainly beyond science if you take science in the sense of the 19th century. It's not a hard science. It's partly a hard science. I mean, the doctrine, let's call it, or the hypothesis of the archetype and these things, you can really prove with hard science.
With hard research.
With hard research, and you can put it under everybody's nose, and you can make experiments with it and so on. So there is a bit of hard science in it. Then there is an art, because analysis is an art, is a skill. It depends on the personality, on the spontaneity of the personality. I would say that's much more something artistic or generally human. And then you can say, if you want a definition, I would say the closest to it is something like the original Taoism in China. A kind of wisdom. Not the Taoism who later became schools and you know, techniques, but in the Lao Tse and Chuang Tse and such people. That was a wisdom which has infinitely influenced China without having definite techniques. And I see Jungian psychology more parallel to that a bit. And that's why it's not a religion and it's not a science. If you want a word, I mean, I don't like words, but if you want to pin a word on it, I would say a kind of wisdom.
In most of the world religions, there are forms of worship and prayer and celebration which are group or extroverted in nature. They're not introverted.
Yes.
Something
a ritual or something.
A ritual.
Yes. Yes, I would say wherever there is a deep archetypal experience, which is always also an emotional experience, there is a spontaneous need for acting it out. And in a way, that is a ritual. And if congenial people are together, it can happen that it becomes a group ritual, that something is done, one does together. But if you organize it, the great danger is that then people come in who are not in the congenial mood. They had just an annoying letter at home before they joined, or something, or they are just in a sober mood and not gripped or so. They are not into it. And then it becomes a formalism and a dishonest gesture. And that is the death of all ritual, and that's what makes religions die, that their rituals and prayers and gestures always become mechanical and done by people who don't feel them anymore, more and more and more. And that's the great danger. That's why Jung preferred to leave it to the spontaneous happenings. The hippies meetings where they just waited for happenings was close to something real. That was quite good. One should be, if anything, I would say one should keep it to in such a form. To come sometimes together and wait for spontaneous happenings.
What about, have you ever seen an American Indian dance?
Yes.
The whole village participates, and they have this long process of preparation. As a way, I think, maybe of bringing each person into it.
Yes, I haven't been there, but I've read quite a lot about it, and my impression is that that is really genuine. That's not a formalism. That's a genuine and living expression of an archetype. But you hear already now that if Indian children had gone to school and have been indoctrinated by white man's nonsense, they can't participate anymore. They don't get back into the mood. So that means as long as you are in it, it's all right, but you can't, it's very difficult to find your way into it again once rationalism has thrown you out.
Yes.
And that's why I don't know if Jungians who come generally from having had a neurosis and having been indoctrinated by rational school education, if they can do it genuinely.
I have wondered if there isn't something, for example, what happened in Germany, because there was such a sweeping over of the culture and a kind of falling into ecstasy almost.
Yes, that was a genuine religious phenomenon, but in a negative form.
In a negative form.
You see, that's the danger. When it happens collectively, it generally slips off into the negative. Jimmy Jones. It slips off into unconsciousness and letting oneself go into emotion, losing self-control. While, for instance, those Indian dances, though they are ecstatic, are highly formally controlled.
Oh, yes.
They are highly formed.
Yes.
And not just letting out one's emotions and falling into them. And you see, religions have a huge shadow. I mean, the Islam who went around and right to the doors of Vienna beheading everybody who didn't worship Allah and so on. These are these emotional religions who are just mass movements. And they are not necessarily something ideal. They are just the archetype sweeping people away. You can say The ones who are in it enjoy it, and the ones who are out of it pay the bill. If you don't worship Allah, head off.
I remember reading about Max Zeller's dream that he was, in working with the inner life, he was building on a temple that would take hundreds of years to be built, and Jung called him back after an hour to speak about this dream. And he said, you know how long it will take for the temple? 600 years. Well, that image is quite a powerful one, as if all this individual work is building a temple.
Yes, I think that's what I meant when I said before there are thousands of Jungians who have never heard the name Jung. All the people who are honestly working on their own inner problem in their own way are builders of a new temple, and it takes 600 years because that means it takes as long till we are fully in the Aquarian age. And then it'll probably come out what was building itself up. But one must not want it with one's mind or head, or want to organize it. One must let that happen. That's a dream which would compensate feeling a bit lonely, feeling a bit an outsider. And the unconscious says to him, no, no, do your own job and you are one of the builders. Hermes Trismegistus said in one active imagination to an alchemist, I am the friend of whoever is lonely. The unconscious doesn't speak to you when you are with people. Your attention goes to the people. Well, when you are lonely, I've lived in this tower sometimes 3 weeks alone without speaking to one word to anybody. And I sometimes thought I was going off my head. But the unconscious became alive. It was my partner. And that's why you have to be lonely, so that the unconscious becomes stronger. It's like loading up the unconscious, and then it manifests. And then you are not lonely anymore. So we have to support the unconscious. It's not enough to just have it. We have to actively turn towards it and support it so that it then helps us.